Chapter 5. This is crazy. The next day, as we worked on the project, after our regular job hours were fulfilled, I continued with my story. They wanted to know more as we worked. I only spoke about it when they asked me to. Did I say more about how I knew this technology was accessible? I sure did. Truth is truth, but only when they asked me to. This isn't a short story, and we had to stay busy, but it helped pass time when we worked, which sometimes became redundant. So as we wound copper wire into coils, which was boring, someone asked me to continue to tell them more about my hayfork days, the town with the strange name. I didn't always do this, and the excuse was, I will when all of you are here to listen, but most time they were all there. John, our pilot, on this day was absent because of his job, which could take him days to return from shuffling people from city to city. I continued this time anyway. Well, all I can tell you is, after seeing that display of unidentified objects, I thought the odds of anything else happening there would be slim to none, but once again I was proved wrong. The next thing I found out about was how haunted the hotel was by witnessing two strange events there as I lived and worked there. One was a smoky figure traveling down the hall, and another occurrence what I heard was a big party down in the ballroom early in the morning, which was extremely odd. When I went downstairs that morning for coffee, I asked Mickey what was going on in the ballroom with all the old-time music and hoopla. She looked at me funny and said nothing was happening in the ballroom. There was no aerobics class this morning, and it had been quiet all morning. You know, the exercise class doesn't start till this afternoon on Thursdays, she reiterated. She stated this quite assuredly as she looked at me a bit puzzled, since I knew this. I didn't believe her. I knew what I heard, and asked to take a look in the back. And when I did, I found it was empty and dark. As I walked back to the front bar, she said, "I told you so." All I could say was, "You were right, that was weird," and she let it go at that. Nothing else was said. I let it go thinking that there must be an explanation, even though I had not found one. It wasn't until years later that I did actually have some proof. It wasn't until I re-examined an old photo of me painting the hotel that Rachel took that had some evidence in it, and guess what? Not only are there strange anomalies in that photo, but I bought a postcard from a store in town, and anomalies are in that picture too. The postcard is black and white and from 1982. It had orbs in it, but mine had faces in the windows. I brought my photos and showed them to the crew. What you'll see is two figures in the second from the left upper window. One is of an old-time miner 49 type, with the typical mustache of those days and a prominent chin that you would expect, and an Indian girl with pigtails peeking around a corner from around a doorway in the hallway, both looking in the same direction. The hallway connects and ends at the last room, which is the first window on the left. The far window to the right has a person in Mickey's bed. No one was up there. Everyone that lived there was working. Everything was locked up and no one else had access. At this point, I have to wonder about this town and areas surrounding it. Why all the activity? Claude, Mickey, and I were the only ones that had access to those rooms, and we were the only ones staying in the hotel at that time. He didn't rent the vacant rooms to anyone at this time. You needed to have a key just to get upstairs. For a while I thought I was crazy, but here's some proof, and you will see orbs in that black and white postcard too. John's girlfriend, Amy, asked, "Aren't orbs just dust reflections?" "Sure," I said, "most of them are dust particles, but not all of them. So I feel there's something that takes that shape and manifests into our reality from time to time as an orb shape. And I'm sure some are real. I have seen one pass through my house once in Florida, a red one that also went through my television set and destroyed it. What looks to be a big orb in my photo on the upper left side where I'm painting is a scratch. The rest are the real thing. You'll see more in the right-hand window. There's a skeletal figure laying down in what is Mickey's bed. Remember, there's no one upstairs. This town, place, has more going on in it than I could have ever imagined or seen before anywhere. One of the odd things about this town is most people that live there seem to have a very similar belief about this place. So what Mickey says is true, and that is, most people know about the weirdness here and accept it. What you might be thinking to yourself, I said to myself also, and I wanted to believe that it was all my imagination, but that's not true. Then I bought this postcard from a local store that I never sent. I never looked at these pictures closely till years later. So just after that color photo was taken in late 1983, I looked at this picture postcard and bought it and found these anomalies from 1982. I never sent it, and it remained buried with all my other photos for years. The man walking with his mother in the black and white photo, is a Native American Hupa Indian. He was a major drinker. Certain times of the month, when Claude did rent rooms back then, he stayed there to recover. His mother wasn't like him. She never drank like he did. She was very social and forgiving, and I loved talking to her. She was the daughter of the only survivor of an Indian massacre that happened up there during the gold rush era. Her mother was an infant when discovered and saved. She named me Motorcycle Mike. The son had a quirk. He would sneak up on you, push you on the shoulder from behind to get your attention. He had passed a few years before 1994. During the winter of 1994, I went there on vacation. Claude had me sleep in a room that he rented from time to time when they were being rented. It was the one he liked and always stayed in. As I started to fall asleep in that room, I was pushed, just like in the past, on the shoulder by some invisible hand from behind and almost fell off the mattress. It was startling, and I had to take a look in the room to see if someone was there, but there was nothing. I had dismissed all the other evidence I had seen there before at that time, but now I would have to seriously reconsider what I believed. This incident is what caused me to look at my old photos for any other proof. He's not the only one staying there, is what I found. So I now have to say definitely that the hotel is haunted. A girlfriend of mine, Donna, who had never been to California, returned to Hayfork with me on a vacation. A few years later, she didn't believe the stories I told her of that town, that place, till she actually seen it for herself. I went there to mine, and the picture is at the digs and the area of her occurrence. One day when Donna went to use the bathroom facilities, She came running back and related what she had experienced, which was a cavalry-type horseman riding up on her as she was squatting and stopping abruptly with all the noise associated from a horse stopping quickly, and he had a saber flashing in the daylight. She sensed that as she witnessed this, he also witnessed her in the prone position. Then she said, all I could do was to stand up abruptly, then it all suddenly vanished. It took her days to relax again. So at this point, she started to believe some of my stories and theories about this place. She now seen it finally for herself as different and special. She finally believed all that I had witnessed could be a possibility. Later, there was more that she seen, but I won't get into all that right now. If it was deception, to me that also proves there's more going on behind the scenes than we know or can see, at least some of the time. When it happens to you, seeing something unusual, and I know, till you do, you will remain skeptical. But that doesn't matter to me. I know now this is a spiritual world in many ways. I'm sorry, I'm getting off topic a little, but my crew didn't care. They wanted to hear more, and so I continued. To me, there seems to be a couple things going on here. One is there are spirits that are damned or trapped here. Two is there are windows opening up for some reason to the past and the future simultaneously for some unknown or could be geologic in nature. Who knows? Maybe that's what we are seeing from time to time. I don't have all the answers. I just know what I have witnessed. And to me, it was all real and in this reality. Or, three, possibly there's nothing that is paranormal that can't manifest itself in this region by some unknown natural means. But what is natural? Or, none of it is real or paranormal, and that it's all imagination, a trick of the mind. But that possibility in this case doesn't make any real sense, now does it? After all, we are going to prove a form of physics, in this case, came from what may not be a phenomenon at all. The history of Hayfork had lots of trauma involved in its beginnings. I know that the native Indians were chased up to Hayfork from Weaverville and that they eventually were chased to the natural bridge area outside of Hayfork, where all the natives but one baby was massacred. At this point, the business of the day came up. We talked about what was to be done next. As we worked on our craft, our subject of conversation switched back and forth many times about what we worked on that day. We decided on windowless containment for the ship with cameras that would give us a 360-degree view on top and bottom in any direction we wanted to view. We had to think about thrusters for positioning for a maneuver when and if we needed to see something or correct our trajectory while stationary or in a stationary orbit. All these things had to be engineered, and the craft had to be able to be pressurized. We built a false bottom where we could mount landing gear into the body so that they could retract into its body. We made pads for it with stabilizing shockers so it could stand very stable in any terrain or slope to a certain degree. Everything had to be recessed into the body, which was about 35 feet high and about 14 feet wide. The main body was made from plate steel about 1/8 of an inch thick. Someone asked, What happened after that sighting? I started again. So back to those times. After witnessing that huge square-shaped and round object, about 2 weeks go by and I'm painting my ass off. It started to be fun, and one day it dawns on me that I have to go back to get the rest of my stuff and still clean up my camp. I'm a little apprehensive after that first sighting, but I thought, what the heck? I talked myself into it by thinking about it logically. There's no way that that's going to ever happen again. Really, what are the odds of 2 sightings within 2 weeks? Nil. It's the animals I have to worry about. So I put on my backpack, fired up my bike, and I go up that hill. And this will probably be the last time I go there for a while. Winter's coming. It's a nice ride, and the country is spectacular to look at. The colors of fall were breathtaking, and somehow all this made you feel alive with a sense of well-being. There was more of a crisp, cold chill in the air now. Every now and then there were real short bursts of light, cold rain. It was exhilarating, and I thought I needed to get everything on this trip. I arrived there and parked my bike, walked into where my camp was, dismantled my tent. I loaded up my backpack, and now it was an awkward load when I got on my bike. I would have to return one more time in the next day or two for a 5-gallon bucket and things like my shovel, and to take out all the signs of my occupation. I still couldn't take it all. This time, I once again chose to go early in the evening. I walk out of my campsite back to where the bike was, and as I left, I proceeded up the dirt path of a worn-down road caused by nature and slight water erosion. It was pretty well hidden and overgrown also. I couldn't help thinking about it, how it was twilight now, but there was nothing unusual that I could sense, which gave me a feeling of security somehow. I felt relieved, but I still had thoughts popping up in my mind about the last time I was there. I again kept reassuring myself that the odds of seeing something like that again was so high against it as to be astronomical, and that there would be no way I would witness something like that again, even in 100 years. No way. But again, about 8 miles along, I found I was wrong. I get tired of being wrong. It was after cresting the mountain and heading down at the top of Tule Creek Gulch, that 12-mile ride downhill, that I noticed that there were lights below on the ground, where the head of Tule Creek comes out of the mountain, and again, I had to wonder. I had to stop to see what was down there. Lights? This again? What the hell? These were not there before. I walked this road more than 10 times now, and there was no habitation there. There wasn't a road down there. I'm on guard now and noticing anything that catches my eye, because it was too easy to do in the dark countryside. It wasn't even a quarter mile from the summit, and I noticed right off an inexplicable scene unfolding before my eyes. There's nothing down there but forest and the headwaters for Tule Creek coming out of the sheer wall of that summit. So now several things came to mind to explain it. First, there must be houses down there that I never noticed before. As I thought this, I see movement of the lights that were around the starfish-shaped object. That's no house. It was what I knew to be true at this point. I had stopped here before to look down at the steepness of the edge of the road here, and I think I even took a picture of it. Matter of fact, I know I did. I thought, well, it's the lumber company or lumberjacks, and they are taking wood out of the forest. The only problem with that theory was that they do not work at night. The object on the ground was huge, with many lights all around it. Lights that all seemed to be examining and roaming around larger objects, as if they were examining everything nearby that was in nature. The large object's thickness and shape reminded me of a giant starfish, five-sided and alive in a way. I had a perfect view from my vantage point as I was on the road and looking straight down. It was at least 1,000 feet down the side of the hill. The little light clusters of twos, threes, fours all seemed to be separate units or machines that had different tasks, and it seemed to me they were examining trees and everything in the surroundings of the larger star-shaped object. It was as if they had never seen anything like the woods before. They looked kind of frenzied in their observations of our nature, or they were in a hurry. My mind went through just about every explanation that I could think of for what I was witnessing at this time, and I couldn't come up with anything to compare that scene except a sci-fi movie. What kept popping up in my mind was I was looking at interdimensional travelers, or else, by the size of this, those who watch the skies, would have spotted this in our airspace. It could be they are opening windows to get here. I thought it's the only reason why the Air Force isn't all over the place. I needed another witness. I glanced around, but I was alone. It wasn't long till I heard something running up the hill in my direction. I thought, how could that be? It's not possible. A human could climb up the side of that terrain, but it would be slow going. You would need ropes and gear. What I heard told me that something was running up that steep grade. There were two of them. Whatever they are moving fast. What could move that fast here? They were huge and in a hurry. One was to my left and one was to my right, both heading toward the road and me. They were crashing their way up the hill. This sounded familiar, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up once again. I suspected that they were running from what was below them. Behind me was a steep mountainside. There would be no retreat that way. My mind raced as I thought about what to do. And the more I panicked, I assumed these had to be bears because of the amount of noise. They were constantly dislodging loose rocks as they approached, and the rubble was repeatedly crashing downhill, making more noise through the brush as they hit tree trunks, like drums being beat out of time. They sounded like they were huge, and the only creature I had seen climbing a slope that steep, that quickly, are black bears. So, I'm going to be sandwiched between two bears running scared from whatever it was down in that valley. Time ticks slowly now. What was it running uphill in my direction? I thought soon I would be trapped between two scared black bears. I had to get away. My intuition was telling me I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see, and whatever was coming at me was dangerous. I remember during this event riding around with Carl one evening and seeing a bear do this exact same thing. When we surprised it with headlights coming around a corner of the road, it ran up an 80% slope for about 200 feet straight up and disappeared over the top in seconds. Right, Carl? He answered. I remember that evening. So I contemplated my demise as the event continued. I started to panic. I tried to start my bike, and it would not fire up. I'm too close to the object, I thought, and just as others had witnessed, I was experiencing a shutdown of the motor's electrical system from their close proximity. I was realizing the same thing was happening here. I only had one way out of this, and it was gravity. I turned the key on and let it roll down using the slope of the road and tried to jump start it. After a few feet, it would not start. I would have to wait for it to pick up speed again, and in the pitch black darkness, I could not really tell where the edge of the road was. All I could do was guess and hope I didn't run off the road because it was a long way down. It was right before my second attempt that the first creature made it onto the road. The second creature was behind me somewhere in the dark now also. All I had to do was get past this one. But the night was really dark and you could not see clearly ahead without a headlight. This was an extremely dangerous stretch of road with 1,000-foot drop-offs. I knew it was there somewhere in front of me. I could sense it on the road. I let out the clutch again and nothing. I kept losing my momentum when I did this. I kept going down to a crawl for a few moments, waiting, then slowly when the momentum of gravity helped pick up speed again, I could try again. Time slowed down, and about this time the creature ran right by me, missing me only by an inch or two. I could feel the heat coming off its body. It was that close as it passed by me on my left side. I was right, it was huge. I knew the other one was behind me, and the one you can't see is the dangerous one. So I let the clutch out again. I gained enough momentum and it started up. Thank God, I thought. I have no idea how I stayed away from the edge of the road because it was that dark. Somehow I was pretty lucky or blessed that I did manage to stay on the road, put distance between me and whatever was there in the dark. Since I had the bike running, I decided to turn around and see what those creatures were. I figured I could get close enough with the headlight on high beam, and if I had to, I could pull a U-turn and outrun them, or so that was my plan. A few seconds later, I seen them, and now I was amazed at what these creatures were. Range cattle. They were steers, about 1,200 or more pounds each, standing on the road with their eyes bulging, with lots of the whites showing as if bewildered and frightened, soaking wet now with perspiration. The next thing that raced through my mind was, how in the world they have run up that steep slope that fast? And then the next thing I thought was that they must have been really frightened by what was down there, and why. So now the question was, what had made them do that, and why were they so frightened? The whole incident was strange and funny at the same time. So I decided to go back to the spot where I had been watching that weird object. But now there were no lights, no sound, nothing but darkness, with no sign of anything wrong or strange. I must have, in my hurry to escape the impending dangers, missed the object's departure from the area. If they did depart, or did they simply black their lights out? It was at this point the hair on the back of my neck stood up again, and I knew better than to stick around alone, so I headed home. What was striking to me was I had two major sightings within a few miles of each other and 2 weeks apart. Very strange. What made me feel better was Whatever it was I was witnessing, hearing, and sensing, the animals in the area also sensed and ran from it. Did they sense its intentions? Well, the odds of the same thing happening again just got blown out of the water. The next 4 years or so I spent up there were uneventful as far as sightings go, and I didn't see much more after those events during this time frame till I went back there on vacation with Donna Patrick, the girlfriend I told you about before. That next summer, I started my mining experience. I learned how to mine by the book and how to pan, but Carl had shown me the panning techniques and a few other tricks. Isn't that right, Carl? Yes, it is. And why am I here today? I have also witnessed some of these things there too, especially the technology. Eventually, I learned to douse for gold that following winter by an old-timer I met up there. His dad was a 49er. I then taught Carl something new about mining. That's right, Carl stated. And now, to the heart of what we have here and how I based it into a theory. What I discovered about dowsing is that it works. I never miss the good spots or traps by using that method, and always hit whatever the ground had to offer. And believe me, it's scattered about, and there is lots of ground not holding any gold. You could go broke easily just using book knowledge. What is known in the books is good base and common sense, but it doesn't mean it's always there. Book knowledge is a good base to start with when you get on good ground, but the question is, where does it hold gold? It may look good and the books may say it's there, but that doesn't mean it's there. And without an edge, you risk going broke trying to find it most of the time. Some guys use a metal detector, but that is limited in depth of the ground. And I couldn't afford ground penetrating radar equipment back then either. So this was the next best way, so why not? The method is also a key to this whole technology. Believe me, dowsing, had to be proven to me too. And the way that happened was with the gold I found. That was enough proof for me. Tim Pogue's information enabled us to immediately pick back up on the trails and the lines of gold so we could avoid moving ground with nothing in it. What I learned from that point on from this ancient knowledge and technique is that why we're here today. What makes dowsing work makes this project work and possible. Next, Chapter 6. Dowsing for gold and realization. Many things can be said about dowsing, good and bad. I have studied the effect for some time now, and here's the idea in a nutshell. Skeptics say it doesn't work. I tested it in the field and it works with an average of 90% accuracy while mining. So dowsing works in the field, but not in a controlled test. This is what I learned in the field and in a lab type setting. Then the scientists and skeptics, say the force can't be measured. Skeptics say that physicists say this. So I thought about that aspect for a while and came to a conclusion that they might have been overlooking the simplest way to do that. So in other words, they overthought it. I knew they missed something. They had to. The proof I was seeing and getting, the money, made it so. I figured out how to measure the force, and it finally dawned on me after hundreds of experiments and lots of time that they were overthinking this, and I found a very simple way. That simple way improved my accuracy to about 90% correct in a double-blind test in a lab-type setting. If you can measure the force, you would then have a control over the unknown reactions or false readings. Those unknown false readings are why a controlled test was near impossible. Overcoming the negative aspect became my goal, and measuring is what did it for me. Why would I be so interested in something like this? Proof of a theory from this example would change everything. That's what happened to open my eyes up to a new way of thinking. How do you guys think I got the money to invest in all this equipment, by the way? They looked at each other, and some of them simply said, "The gold." "You got it," I said. Carl was in the background smiling because he knew all of this already. He was there. He taught me the basics, and I taught him how to find gold by dowsing. So he's been on board from the start. He even ran tests with me in Hayfork. The gold doesn't last forever, but at this point, it made my theory possible, along with other inventions. Soon my thoughts back then also were about this need to do something about global warming, but not what the government said or what corporations laughed about. Back in the 70s and 80s, they already knew about global warming and that we were jeopardizing the planet's environment. Hence, the hole in the ozone was brought to light by the media and some academics. I love the government's response back then. Their way to fix the problem was to fix global warming, wear a hat, sunglasses, and sunscreens, quote unquote. They even ran ads stating this in a mockery response to that finding. Here's basically how it works. For gold and metals, gold is an element and very heavy on the atomic scale. You take a Y-shaped willow stick, and the two branches that are symmetrical is what you grasp. The leading conjuncture of the two opposing ends you slice with a knife in a parallel fashion and insert a piece of gold. Make sure you secure it so you don't lose it. That is supposed to change its properties from a water seeker to a gold metal seeker. The guy that taught me, Tim Pogue, was kind of famous. He's the man who found the uranium for the Army engineers during World War II, when they couldn't find enough to make atomic bombs. Someone at once blurted out, "You're kidding me." Someone else said, "You're joking." Nope. He had mines and equipment all over the lower 48 and in Alaska. You can check if you want to. You see what we have here, referring to the working model, which is proof. This is the result of that. As Tim stated, if you learn this, you'll never pull a shovel of dirt out of the ground without hitting pay dirt / gold. In other words, no wasted labor. I had experienced how important that was, and what it was like to not make money for the labor you have to put into mining. The basis to all this and the model is more work forced out than energy in. Before I knew about this technique, I mined for 2 weeks dredging with a 5-inch without more than $20 a day. And some days weren't even worth mentioning. It amazed me. I used all of my book knowledge looking for it and not finding no more than a trace. And this guy comes out with a wise stick, a willow branch, and in a matter of minutes showed me where the gold is. Amy asked, "Did you believe he could help you?" Anything was worth a shot, but I still tried on my own for a few more days. Silly me. Once I started to listen to what he said, I started to pull about an ounce a day again. It was about what I was getting before I lost the lines. "What do you mean by the lines?" Drew asked. "The lines are the paths the gold follows downstream. They are usually faint, but when they collect over hundreds of years in traps of low-pressure obstacles or holes on the bottom, along those lines they become very lucrative. If you are on a good one, anyway. Those traps collect large quantities over time, and that is what we really look for." Of course, I didn't want to believe him right away, and after a couple more futile days of nothing, I had no choice but to try where he suggested. And the results made me reconsider that it worked. And after seeing how easy that method was, I decided I would learn that method too. Why not? I was told that many dredgers, placer miners, go broke and have to quit months before the season is over. It was true, and the odds in town were against me. It seemed no matter where I put in. As different years went by, I heard others in town say the gold wasn't there where I was mining. You always hear that rumor, it seems. They would say Jerry or Larry mined there a year or two before me and cleaned it out. I proved them wrong each time because of what Tim taught me. During the winter near springtime and the waters dropped, I was checking a bank where we thought we would put a dredge in the next season. Dousing there was functioning like it was supposed to, but then all of a sudden pointed straight up. And I kept trying to get it to stop because that wasn't the way it was supposed to work. It was doing the exact opposite of pointing the gold out. And I stood there wondering how or why this was happening. There had to be an explanation because the nugget I was using in the end of the willow branch was 1/5 of an ounce, and if anything, should be falling downward by the force of gravity alone because of its weight. Carl said, "Somehow the polarity got reversed?" "Yes," I said, "and it proved that you can repel metal and its weight in the gravity field." It was the simplest example and explanation. This was a turning point for me. "Carl seen that happen, didn't you?" "Yep," he simply remarked. I wasn't sure what caused it to do that at the time, but that's what we proved with the model, and now we will upscale that into a device we can test in Drew's airplane. Drew said, "No problem. I'm game." I have studied the effect now for 20 years, and here's what I know and have theorized. What Tim taught me was wrong partially. Gold in the end of the stick isn't attracted to just gold. It picks up all metals. Why is the question? So here's what I think is happening. When metals that are heavy in weight and are in the ground, they distort the gravitational field through negativity, and it's that distortion that causes the reaction, because all metals that are trapped in rivers with placer golds in those traps, cracks, and boulder packs, the metals add to the distortion. Gold, lead shot, bullets, coins, magnetic black sands, which scientists, geologists agree on, are the remains of a large metal meteor, a very large meteor. Plus, it will pick up a quartz vein holding gold miles away. Another key is the quartz. To get the motion out of something, you have to put energy into something. The energy is in your body via your aura, and that energy is similar to a magnetic field powered by static, basically. I looked at Magic Square, and he started to smile. With the first model, I deduced that certain quartz also holds a charge and or magnifies it, so we use that too. There's more work produced than energy used because it connects to the field of the earth. It's drawing the electrical distortion negatively and is using negative energy. The energy we know about, or almost nothing about, works overly efficiently. When you know how to access it, and as far as we know, we are the first to amplify it. If we do that, draw energy through a negative ground and distort the field around us, then any place on Earth can be accessed, and not just where metals distort the field. The best description is that the distortion is a miniature event horizon, the edge of a well that the object/matter is attracted to, but only if energized because of the small scale from the other side of the advent horizon. That energy well is the magnetic field in distortion. Then there are the spikes, or the high points of the field. They are like a solar flare in a sense, or rather what a black hole is ejecting, as energy or magnetic field can't be contained at all times, and are distorted in opposite direction. One force in it and one forces it out, up and down against the background field that is powering the event. As far as mining gold, the hard part is this. You need to be able to tell the difference between a speck that isn't worth the labor and a lode that is profitable. Thus, the need to measure the force for proof of it working in a dowsing or a double-blind test. After testing this many times, I found out that Tesla was right when he said we should be able to use the field of the earth to power our houses and vehicles with virtually free energy and fly with it. I learned about Stubble and his discovery of the earth battery, which was more proof. What I witnessed on that bank that day was a form of levitation on a small scale, so the energy is reversed and an opposite effect occurs, or as I found out, it followed one of those spikes or magnetic flares upward. It occurs with less than 0.001 milliamp of your body's electrical field. It lifted approximately 3.5 pennyweight. In grams, that's 5 to 6 grams approximately. That levitated upwards. When that happened, I absolutely knew that day was important. And at the same time, I thought this could fix the Earth's problems. My mind rushed back to what I had witnessed out there on that road, and I remembered the question in my mind. What is it that they use to levitate that kind of weight, mass? What principle of propulsion could they be using to defeat gravity? And I just seemed to witness the key to this technology right here in my hands. We can build this, and we are. This first primitive model that I demonstrated the effect with, and the plane tests now with what we've been working on, we're on our way. Thanks to Drew for the use of the plane. You're welcome, he sputtered sarcastically. Everyone thanked him. We will soon know and have the evidence that will urge us forward as I see it. If successful with these next sets of tests, there will be no telling where we can go with this. I continued. Scientists gave up on proving that there was anything to dowsing because they did not learn all of the negative aspects and how to overcome them in a controlled test environment. Can't blame them. It took me years to just figure that out. They gave up because it was such a weak force. They figured it wasn't worth the effort. What they didn't know is that the force coming out is greater than the energy input, because some or most is coming from natural forces already. They're feeding back into the device in a loop. Like what an amplifier does with sound. Add more power and the frequency gets louder. An amplifier gets loaded with feedback, the tone increases in our devices. Increase its load. You feed it more power. You now know this, especially as you approach or get closer to the field, or that part of the field you are attracting to or repelling from. When it holds the distortion, it gets stronger, faster. In its weakest state, it can pick up a depression in the field that's miles away, and it will pick out the strongest source that's the closest to the dowser, or soon the mechanism position to those attractors. It's like walking on a bed of nails. The nails are the spikes in the field, and the foot is the ship. Drew interjected. Now I know what you're getting at. This fills in the unknown gaps that other technologies are missing in their theories. He scurried off to get a few drawings and prints he had and started to write on them as I finished up my explanations. One other factor that is important is that the closer you get to that source, the stronger the pull or reactions are. And there's no stopping that reaction unless you break the circuit. The same thing happens with a dowser. I knew all this at the moment on the creek bank when the mechanism, the dowsing rod, pointed up. And then all of this made sense somehow. Before I gathered you all together, I had built a small model that eliminates the organic and the human element and powered it with a 9-volt battery that I demonstrated, right? So this here is the theory I came up with. I handed them a copy of the proposal that Magic Square and I put together years before in the early 90s. Figure 1. page 398. I found out that NASA thought that this was interesting and they still turned us down for lack of budget. And they believed scientists that supposedly knew all there was to know about this in physics. Skeptics also said they wanted me to prove dowsing. All I knew was that the money in my pocket proved it. And there was the fact that no one that year or any year that I mined for gold on that same creek had found as much as I did, whichever year I mined. What I wanted was to prove with NASA that the opposite reaction caused motion, as you all know. Magic called out from the grill and picnic area. It's time to eat and take a break. We rounded up Carl's kids and we all sat down to barbecued steaks, corn, potatoes, and drinks. So after this, the kids ran back to play. Then the questions start to fly again. One of my friends, Carl I think, asked, "What's next?" It's time to finish that second, for the lack of a better word, device. What about the rest of you? Are you ready to do this? All of them looked at each other, then hands joined in a circle of hands on top of each other, and a cheer went up, and all agreed as hands flew upward. So this is what happened when some of the most intelligent people came together with their advanced expertise, because they knew this was all real now and doable. They didn't need convincing anymore, and I will have to regress to the other truth of this story, which answers the UFO mystery as Magic Square and I see it, or at least we thought it did. I could only convince Carl to come down out of the goldfields after he read the proposal. And I'll give you this. We suspended targets in the air on a line, and what I got out of that was there's an energy going up from the earth. The stick points up, and then when you move over to the other side, there's an energy line going down to the earth, and the stick points down. That experiment was very important. Next, Chapter 7. Chapter 7, Third Sighting. The next time we got together, I initiated the conversation because Magic and I went over this many times, debating if what we were going to do wasn't going against our moral and religious convictions. There are some other things I want you to know about and what we are up to or against. I want you to know about the really weird stuff because I feel it is important. It is part of my intuition, and whether or not you feel with all of this, we aren't going against our moral and religious convictions. Okay, boss, someone said. First I said, right, and don't call me boss. I then laughed and started. I knew the theory would work, and this is the rest of what happened up in the wilderness before Donna. It was 1989 when I decided to go to Florida to work and rejoin the human race. After all, the adventure I was on had to end, just like the more extreme isolation of my camping experience had to end. It was fun and rewarding to be the minor mountain man, plus 6 years of relative pure beauty and living with a great woman named Peggy. I loved it. We made enough to leave, plus the fact that I had not seen any of my family for 7 years, and it seemed to the both of us we needed to change our paths. I sent Peggy ahead of me to Stockton to her mother's house, which was to be our last staging area before we left for Florida. I decided to stay there for a while longer in Hayfork to move the rest of what we owned with my van after selling most of what I couldn't take or needed to keep. When I left, I had waited just long enough to catch the beginning of the snow season in the higher elevation up in Wildwood. And as I came down in elevations in increments of 500 feet at a time, I passed through all kinds of weather changes, from snow to rain and then light drizzle, back and forth, warm then cold, always changing as I drove. It seemed as I came down in elevation every 500 feet, there was a different and well-defined change in the ecosystems, and each drop had its own climate and biosphere, depending on which side of the mountains you happened to be on, southern exposure or northern exposure, etc. It had been a few years or more since my personal encounters there, and more than 13 or 14 years since my encounter and sightings in my military days. As I drove on Highway 36 on my way to Red Bluff, I rounded a certain spot right before a section we called Roller Coaster Road, which is part of Highway 36, when all of a sudden, from behind a hill in a campground for kids, I spotted that same craft that I'd seen 14 years earlier in the Army. This campground, which is sponsored by a large corporation, had a main, very large gathering complex with what seemed to be 40 or so cabins for 2 or 3 occupants around it on the slope of a small hill. From behind that main building is where this craft rose up. I thought that was very strange, and not only that, but the guy that was at the controls this time seemed to be the same one that I witnessed before and in the same craft. I thought this was very creepy. So now I was really curious, and I decided to use my mind to talk to whoever he was if possible. There was no other choice, no other options. My hands had to be on the wheel and my eyes on the road. There was nowhere to pull over to observe. I don't know if I would have if I could. So I figured if this craft and person were so advanced, and if anything about ESP was remotely true, it might be the only way to get answers and communicate. Only this time, he seemed human, just like in the Army days. Just for the hell of it, I tried. As he lifted up from behind a hill to my right, I found as I traveled he started to pace my truck just slightly ahead of me most of the time. I found that creepy. Amy spoke. Army days? You haven't told us about that. I guess I will soon. Hang on. I started again. He paced me slowly at my right side, but with that terrain between us, which was hilly, and now with more oaks blocking my view from time to time. This was scary in more than one way, as I could only glance occasionally. He paced me at about 300 to 500 yards, average distance, depending on the terrain, that he had to travel around and the terrain I had to drive around. As he traveled along the same path and direction I was traveling in, I had no idea what this was all about or why. I considered what I had read or heard about UFOs from the past and from what others had documented, and I wasn't going to stop out here, and I couldn't. It was too dangerous. The guy at the controls looks eerily familiar, and it was freaky. If I didn't know better, I would say he was an old friend somehow. It was the weirdest thing. I had seen this thing before in the Army. Magic said quietly, "Time traveler?" Questioning, drawing them out of their box to think for a moment. This caused a debate, some of them agreeing and some of them not. Talk of time travel can get deep. After that interjected, I started again. Or after that interjection. This is what happened before I built my first working model, and now even more reason and why I tried to build it. After all, how many times does a person need to see this type of physics before trying to do something about it? This was another closer view again of this type of aviation and physics. I developed my theory up in the mining fields and didn't apply it till about 6 years later, after this next incident I'm telling you about. Meanwhile, this object kept pacing me. I knew it was superior to anything known on the planet just by seeing what I could at this time. At any rate, I figured I might get an answer if I asked in my head, like before, questions. But more to the point, like, what is your power source and where does it come from? It was then during a straight part of the road that the craft turned on its side and showed me the bottom of the ship. It was answering, but not directly. I was really friggin' amazed that I was seeing a result, an answer. I knew right then that ESP works also. That whole night was puzzling till now. As we all know, this thing had a solid gray bottom with about 8 solid crystals that were lit up and glowing with all the colors of the visible spectrum sticking out of its underbelly. Then it flipped back to the original position. I now understood witness accounts of a wheel on its side. It reminds me of the biblical account in Ezekiel and how it looked to him as a wheel. It was being coy though, and I knew it, but I now knew that it heard what I was asking like before. So I got more relevant. I asked, where does your power source come from? The answer was New Mexico. I couldn't believe that. This was the way it was going to go. Riddles? Really? I was expecting a different answer from a different source. Now it was rather depressing. Its response to me seemed partial, like it wasn't all coming through. It was breaking up as I received it, and it seemed it was relating the answers metaphorically. But why would it answer that way? John said, just like the first time up there with the square object. I said yes, in a sense, except in these instances you have a visual that didn't seem to go with the theme at all, but at the same time seeing more clearly. Very strange. He was tracking me for a reason, and I couldn't quite pick up on the reason. I came out of Red Bluff about now, and I had been going east and I haven't seen him for about 3 miles now because of the buildings in town and businesses. I figured that I had lost him. It's gone now, and that was all I would see. I wondered if I had been sleep driving or if I hallucinated or something. It was too crazy to accept. If I was sleeping and driving, I don't think I would have made it through the roller coaster part of Highway 36. I got to Interstate 5, turned onto the exit, and headed south about a mile down the highway. The craft reappeared. It was to my right and west of me, and I could not believe that I was seeing it again. I asked if this was the same one I seen about 15 years ago. His answer was yes. I said, why? More than once I asked. No answer. I asked, what makes your craft move? It turned sideways and showed me the bottom again. The placement of the crystals was perfectly symmetrical and in a circle. Because it seemed he was deceptive, I became cautious. He wouldn't tell me the exact answers I wanted to know. I definitely thought this was to hide something, but why make contact? I even pulled over and rolled down the passenger window so there wasn't anything between myself and what I was looking at. It still looked the same and also stopped. I had to believe there was a reason for all this. There had to be, but it was so far unclear. It was as if I was being blocked now from a very important piece of information. All I get is paradox. I asked one more question, and it was, how do I know you are telling me the truth? The answer came back, you will know in New Mexico. Hindsight is 20/20. He was making a rhyme out of the answer. I thought to myself, WTF? This is the same craft I seen at Fort Campbell. 1,000 questions and no answers. It seemed just more questions. Whoa, back up, Drew said. What happened at Fort Campbell? Hold on, I'll get to that. I continued. Well, here's the thing. I wasn't going to go through New Mexico as far as I knew anytime soon. So I put it out of my mind at this point. What else could I do? There was no way I was driving through New Mexico. I had planned to go to Stockton and stay for a while. I was going to take the northern route to Indiana and help my family move to Florida. What I thought was going to happen in a certain order didn't. I was late and had to go to Florida now, and I went through New Mexico. And the only part of that state I saw was a sign that said we were on Highway 666. And a few minutes later, it seemed we were out of that state. That was strange. Was that a coincidence? I don't know. And I don't know how to put that into any kind of context, because Peggy was driving through that state till I woke up. Holy crap, Drew said. Whoa. What happened at Fort Campbell? Amy now asked again. Okay, what I seen that night I saw years before. One day while out in the field on maneuvers, a friend of mine, John McGarrett, came around and said that we were going to move on a 17-mile forced march to attack the enemy's position and get ready to move out, and we needed to roll it up. We had been out there for about 3 days. We marched out at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on our way to attack an enemy's position. It was early when we headed out. It was also hours to get there on foot. Well, that march was long and grueling. It took us about from 4 to about 11 that evening to get within a close distance to where we could set up and dropped some gear to attack. They were dug in and camped south of the road we were walking west on now. We got to our position on the road and prepared to go into the woods to attack. We were told that no one was to remain behind on the road and that everybody was to attack and participate. They didn't tell us too much about what was to take place, except that after a group of helicopters, 6 to be exact, attacked first, we were to advance. So we waited, and then after about 10 or 20 minutes, the choppers arrived. The choppers came in from the north, heading south along a stand of oaks. They then turned due west, still following that block of oaks on the south side of it. They followed the edge of the trees as a marker because they were flying low. If the trees were 30 foot out, then they were 10 or 15 feet above them and followed next to them. They flew slightly past us and then abruptly turned south again. One behind the other, they were to soften up the enemy's position with their armament. We were supposed to follow in behind them, guns blazing. So I watched them, one at a time, come around the corner of the stand of the oaks, and I counted them. There were 6, but before I could turn and attack like the rest of our company, there was a 7th that came around that corner. That wasn't what we were told. This one seemed to lag behind, and it started to slow down. It stopped right near there and hovered in place without a sound and absolutely no movement or deviation as it hovered. That kept me mesmerized. So I stayed on the road to observe the observer. At first, I thought I was misinformed about the number of helicopters they said would be participating. They didn't. This one was not one of ours. I had been trained to know the difference of many military vehicles and aircraft, but this one was unlike anything I had ever seen. I turned to get someone else's attention, but they were all gone now, and I was alone observing. I could hear all the guns suddenly firing and the yelling and all the explosions associated with war, but I just stood there watching. I could have thrown a rock and hit it. It was no more than 80 to 100 feet from me. I wondered if it could see me, and then those short hairs started to stand up on my neck. It was blacked out somewhat, kind of like stealth, but we didn't have that technology back then. It was disc-shaped, and it had a row of square windows in the front. It wasn't spinning, there were no lights spinning, but it looked very much like a saucer. It hovered, and no sound came from it. No prop, no jet, no turbines. There was a person sitting behind what appeared to be a console. Suddenly, he stood up and walked to the back wall and began to do something to the equipment that was mounted behind where he sat. He was working on what I thought was a large-sized computer mounted on a back wall. It appeared to be like something they would use in industry. The craft did not fluctuate at all as it hovered. It was as if it was locked in position. It had no markings that I could read like most military craft would have on them. I didn't see any weapons or missiles on it either. The choppers were long gone and still heading south. I could hear them off in the distance. Soon the shooting was over, and it took a few more minutes for the rest of my company to regroup on the road. As I waited for some of the others to arrive, this guy sat back in his chair and the craft started to move again. It then flew backwards, exactly the way it came, around the corner of the stand of oaks. First east, then it did a turn north. Here's the really weird part. All of its flight was being done in reverse. In other words, it was flying backwards without turning into the direction of flight, as if it were receding back into something, like it was being pulled along by an invisible force. It had not wavered in its elevation or distance from the ground at all, and was totally silent. It seemed to me it followed its exact course in reverse. It was the strangest flight maneuver I had ever seen. It never turned around from what I could see, as you would expect in crafts of that era or any other era. Then it was gone. I just wanted you to know that this sort of thing, except for on rare occasions, doesn't happen all the time, and there are many years that separate sightings of the unidentified in my life. But the military did train me to be a good observer, and my life depended on that training. What I never expected was that I would see that same craft again some 15 or more years later, and as I explain that, I have to add, the really unusual thing is that guy behind the console looked familiar, like the person piloting that craft in California as I drove on Highway 36. It's damn sure weird. Someone asked, "What do you think of that sighting?" None of it at the time made sense. I didn't know what any of that meant at the time. No matter what, it seemed to be trying to get something across or just curious about something. I didn't know then, and not till later. Carl chimed in. If we consider that the theory and hypothesis is correct, then we can extrapolate from what you said, which would mean someone can't make the connection with you somehow. But then you did see something important. That confirms that crystals are important, and we will find that out sooner rather than later. It's like a message was being conveyed but not received at the time, or maybe it was. Exactly. Maybe just enough to push me into all of this, because after I arrived here in Florida, I already was pushed into making that first working device. Then I met the rest of you and figured with all of our backgrounds, we would have one heck of a team. This is when I decided to get all of you together. Just the odds of finding the right people to put this all together is high to none, and look how far we have come. Magic, as you all know, is an electrical engineer and a brilliant mathematician. Drew was our go-to man for welding with any metals and types from TIG to MIG and stick. Mechanical work too. Plus, it is his shop and Magic's property we are on. You work for Harris and Semantics. Drew is a pilot also and owns planes, and both Magic and Drew are letting us use their property to do the project, and all of you are computer whizzes. Amy is an electrical engineer and knows all about telecommunications, so I can't see anything but success. We all have talents that fit right into place, and I realized we all had the technical ability to put this all together. And there was a ton of information already established on the net about this and how to build certain parts of this. But no one till now had the magic combinations to actually make it happen. Till now. No pun intended, magic. Magic took over. None taken. Before we make that third working model, I had to sort out the circuitry with a crystalline structure. Then Magic said, and if we are going to defeat gravity and gather power from the vast electromagnetic fields of Earth, this may be the way. Crystals will amplify the reaction and frequencies, and I think that may do it. But we'll have to grow our own quartz crystals, which will be trial and error, but not impossible. There's definitely a way. We would need to make crystals, large crystals, that deliver and produce the piezoelectrical effect. Then he added, the theories on 0-point energy states that from infinity, from all directions to a point, flows a radiation, and that is mostly magnetic in nature and with a small electrical component. This radiation has a velocity of c squared, the speed of light squared, or 10 billion times faster than that of visible light. This energy can possibly account for what we call the atomic weak force. This may also help explain why both Tesla and I have calculated propagation velocities faster than the speed of light in our experiments, when normal propagation velocities are expected to average around 85% the speed of light. 0-point energy would have to have a velocity very much faster than the speed of light if it is the causal force of our universe, and it would have to be absorbed by matter, or more correctly, energy domains. Atoms follow the basic rules of our mechanical universe. If 0-point energy is behaving as a fluid, mechanical laws can account for many observations and gave us a better understanding on how to accomplish our mechanism. Magic Square was a genius. He was already building the third craft in his mind. He knew where to take this, and it was into the universe. We didn't know how or why we were all drawn together exactly, but learning after being together and talking, we learned that we all had special talents to be drawn together for this project. We learned that we all had these 6 senses, from ESP to telekinesis. Why we had these abilities, we would learn later. We also knew that there was another force detached from this as well, pushing us into this. Call it what you will, at least for now. Next, Chapter 8. Chapter 8, Rules. I told them all that had happened, and now they knew almost everything I had gone through to get to this conclusion. I was hoping I didn't need to say any more. So days went by, and soon months, then a year, till one day I asked our pilot John what we needed to do to keep prying eyes off of us, as Drew's plane was a legal concern, and flying the plane became very soon your part in this. He answered, well, unless you are cleared for a straight-in approach, you must turn in a traffic pattern, left-hand turns unless the A/FD says otherwise, Or did you mean, must you submit a flight plan? I have no idea. You tell me. First, airspace, and later, we all hoped in orbit, in space. It was time for me to learn more. He continued. Usually when traveling to space, you must submit a flight plan, as you will transit Class A, also requiring an instrument rating and an IFR-capable plane. You might be able to fly VFR over the coast and cross the ADIZ and then transmit to space above 17,999 feet. As far as I know, the IFR only Class A restrictions end outside the ADZ. Of course, you will have to re-enter the ADIZ. Me, he said, I always submit a flight plan when I travel, unless I'm saying VFR, and then even I always request a flight following that. I've also found HIWAS to be unreliable in space, so you'll definitely want to get a complete weather briefing from FlightWatch, 1-800-992-7433. This is part of what happens if you are smart. He handed me this, and then use this link to learn more. I'll talk to you in a little while. Let me give this to Drew, I said. I then went to see what was on that link. I talked to Drew about the welds he was doing for the gyroscopes. We looked through that link for about 15 minutes. I met up with John again and said, good stuff to know, that you should keep us under the radar. What I told you earlier should do it, he answered. I brought up, what about after you file a flight plan, let's say for Europe, and then you go out over the Atlantic to test the device, I said, to be safe. He replied, I have no idea what happens when you file an international IFR flight plan and then attempt to close it over international waters. I am an IFR-rated private pilot, a month or so from a commercial endorsement, but I have zero experience with international flights and darn little practical experience with IFR flight. On the rare occasion that I file an IFR flight plan, I fly into towered airports, so I request a visual approach and cancel in the air unless I need to shoot an approach for currency, and then I cancel with the tower once I reach DA and do not intend to go missed. He then asks, how do you plan to get an N number for your airplane? You have to have one, you know. The plane will need one since it is faded and unreadable. Yes, I know. Drew needs to look it up. He told me a while back there should be a record of that. When he finds it, he'll paint it back on. The plane hasn't flown in a while. He'll be doing all the necessary checks first also. John knew what we were up to and later offered to help Drew go over it. If you need a test pilot and you're going to be at Bulgaria Airport or Melbourne with the plane, give me a call. I'll put it through its paces for you. I could also do this from Orlando, OIA, if need be. Amy was right. He would want to be in on this. Great, I said. Drew's going to be doing other things, and his pilot license is expired, so I'll let him know. Also, you will go over the plane with him since it has sat for so long. Besides that, his eyesight is so bad he knows better than to try to fly right now. Outstanding. Everything is falling into place, I thought to myself. John said, I think the smallest of the 3 airports around here is Volcaria. The one that's nearest and very obscure would be the one to use, and it's only a few miles from here. We just have to get it there with a trailer. Does Drew have the capabilities to do that? Probably, but if not, we'll make one. Drew walked over later after he did the research online and said, I found the N number for the plane. I just got it from the previous owner. We'll just repaint it on the tail. Magic Square came over from nearby and added, after a test in the field of the Earth, mates, we'll calculate the scale we need for the drive system I have in mind for a self-sustained version for a microgravity situation, only if you blokes are correct. That's only if it shows us a great enough result in motion and lift. We'll have to build it airtight with a life support system. We'll copy NASA's designs for that. He continued, and then, if unhindered in a microgravity situation, as it should be, then there is no upward limit to the speeds we could achieve up to c, or the speed of light, or maybe even beyond that. His eyes rolled up in a thought, and he continued, we can demonstrate movement in the plane, and the tests would be not unlike the lifter experiments that I have watched. All of you are familiar with those experiments, right? Everyone nodded yes. Magic said, except this next device should lift and move with its energy source and not be tethered to the ground by a power supply or another conveyance. We have something they don't have, the key. We aren't going to have that problem. But first things first. I have found the right forms of electricity to use in the right order. I had been gone for a while, for a long time in the woods. That got big, did it? I asked, referring to the lifter experiments. He said yes, but they are stuck. It won't lift its power source. We should see some of the same results as them, as in the ionization of the hull, just as they did, which will be a good sign. After John talked to Drew for a while about what we had discussed earlier, John said, I have to leave to go run some chores. See you all later when I pick up Amy. He turned and kissed her and left. Thanks, John, I said, and the others repeated their gratitude. Carl then continued the conversation and asked Magic, so if we can do that, then all we have to do is increase the size and power input for a greater reaction. For every reaction, there must be an equal or opposite reaction. That's what Newton's law states. Magic answered, yes. That's what we are getting ready to do, amplify the workforce with an increase in the input, increase its power source exponentially and on the right frequency with the right or best source of electrical current and circuitry. That would mean an exponential increase in its capabilities of workforce. Drew then said, would that make it an unequal reaction? Magic said yes, mate. That is where the known physics breaks down, and why there hasn't been new discoveries in that field since the 40s. Now we have a key, and the breakdown is more movement or speed as I see it. Then Magic added, we should be able to show in the field of the Earth that it will defeat the gravitational pull on the craft with nothing more than the electrical field above and below the Earth. when the device is activated, and since we are going to use gold as a sensor wrapped in a coil of copper wire, and the fact that the gold doesn't magnetize, it would have to rely on the field of the Earth and its electrical nature and the vortex the coils makes. It will cast a singularity to attract two at the same time, repelling like riding a wave. Well then, there it is, Magic said. Let's get back to work. Everyone worked quietly for an hour or so when Big M spoke up again. Here's what I came up with, Mike, about what you said before about the contact you had. That last craft you seen was meant to be a benefit for us all and the whole world by showing us the crystals. There's really no telling just yet, though, since the message you received, you say, was partial or disrupted. Carl added, no matter what, we have a major discovery, and someone is pointing the way, and it's a way that doesn't destroy or pollute. The strange thing is, it might be a time traveler. Amy added, there's a reason that someone keeps coming back in time and keeping an eye on you, if that is the case, manipulating you, which could be good or bad. That's interesting, I said. I didn't get a real close enough look at his face, but the vibe from him was as if I knew him somehow. I asked, if it is a higher form of physics that this can lead to, then is it something we are allowed to possess at this time? And if so, does it escalate into more spin-offs in our immediate future? Good or bad? Is time travel even on the table with this type of physics? Or is he spiritual in nature in a bad way, because it did stop me from tinkering with this and scared me for a few years while I considered about going on with this after I made the first working device. Magic continued. If it is spiritual in nature, they could possibly be using the same principles with different machines or capabilities for movement, or the physics they use in their realm works here also. The same physics works here. It has to be the next step in our evolution that has been hidden. Since I am a Christian, I believe in the principality of good and evil, which is the core belief of the religion. Think about it. The fallen ones want us to fail. We were the ultimate crown of creation in the beginning, and that has been their goal from the beginning of the fall, since they are not under the blanket of grace. They want to take us down with this. Amy spoke up. That could be true. They want us to destroy the world and us. Then she asked, how would we know for sure? Magic chimed in. If you take a sighting for face value, then it means what it means, as I stated. It's a science, but still kind of scary. He said this would also mean the dynamics in science are universal. UFOs wouldn't ever be seen here if it wasn't. If they are just what the government wants us to believe, then all this would be futile, because I also know for a fact that they are real and solid objects. If they are aliens from within the universe, then they are, as best described, other humanoids or possibly spiritual, which according to what is known, then they are probably interdimensional travelers. We know the odds of a traveler from within the universe coming here are slim because of the law of speed of light. What we didn't know about was all the laws of gravity or zero-point energy, or at least till we test. We also don't know how many other universes there are or how many dimensions. The math says there are more, up to 12. The odd thing, if you think about it, the religious text describes some of those different dimensions. Amy asks, what does gravity have to do with it as far as traveling across the universe? I know about the slingshot effect and entering orbit. Well, Drew spoke up quickly, gravity can cause you to sag. This got a lot of laughs and lightened up the atmosphere. He was the funniest skeptical atheist I've ever known. Magic came back with, after he chuckled a bit, they aren't sure, but gravity may be the only thing that can break the speed of light barrier besides zero-point energy. Let me explain. It is like the butterfly effect in a way, only instantaneously. Gravity has to be ahead of C or else everything would be flung out of orbit. And another theory suggests that everything is feeling the gravity across the universe of everything else, no matter how insignificant and far. Okay, now it makes sense, I guess. She then started to walk away, saying, I'll leave it up to you all. You seem to be on it and know what you're doing, as I am witnessing all of this starting to come true. I have to pee. Anybody want anything when I come back? Drew said, yes, bring us a sample. We all laughed as Amy flipped him the finger and walked away. When we were all together again, I asked, since I wasn't sure about their feelings about the spiritual aspect or the ramification of all this, I asked our little team the next important questions. What do you think about what we might discover, and should we hide the information from the government if we are successful? Do we hide it or show it to the world? How do we do this without losing out or getting ourselves killed? Look at the guy that invented the 100-mile-per-gallon carburetor. Walking back just in time and hearing this, Amy was the first to chime in. Her concerns are well noted on saving the planet, as all of us were. I wasn't expecting her to answer, but being fair, I listened, since she knew that we were going to be successful. There's this. The fact that at some point we will be some unknown and unscheduled object that will enter ICBM territory. I am sure all the major powers in the world would not react kindly to the sudden and unexpected start of World War III. Her sarcasm was noted by Drew. Okay, smart Alec, how do we avoid that, he asked. She went on, we need a flight plan that would accommodate that as we worked that out with John, but even more. If this is awesome, or as awesome as we know it will be long gone by the time they figure it out, and what we showed during and after that. Last but not least, if you can move something that fast and far with a fuel cost that is so superior and virtually free and affordable by a private individual or group, then you are a monster for not sharing that technology with an energy-starved world. So there really is no choice, is there? With transport capabilities like that, we could end world hunger instantly, given that much of the troubles of the world are caused by insufficient transport and fuel cost capabilities. With the inertial damper that you would have to develop for this to work instantaneously, you could end the useful traditional weapons forever. Bullets, missiles, bombs, could all become things of the past. World peace could be a reality, so anyone who would try to keep such technology from the world would have to be selfish beyond all reason. I replied, "You're making great points. You have great morals and character, too. I love that." She went on, "These are aspects all of us need to know and think about, but another consideration is we would want to run this kind of experiment over the ocean or on an isolated area. We don't need anyone hurt, and safety is a prime factor and thought for others and ourselves." I kept this thought to myself. You're not a weak kitten, but quite the opposite. And I thought there was something noble about her. I was starting to admire her now, and I see what John, or what I think John, sees in her as far as intellect. "Please continue with your thoughts," I said. "So now we all know that one of the most important factors as a result of an invention as this one represents in theory is that global warming could be reversed and the CO2 levels would start to balance to whatever the normal levels are, and not to mention, but I will, less acid rain, less acid in the ocean, so it would be a tremendous advantage to us all to perfect it." We all knew now for sure what kept her here working with us for free, along with John now, which was my goal to begin with. We needed a pilot, and I would hope all of our goals will be reached, because this went beyond what I thought it could be. There might just be a monster hidden in this technology, I said, but it isn't from us or what we want out of this. I wanted this to come out and be used by all of us and all nations, but not as a weapon, but hopefully as a deterrent to war, and now Amy has brought it to light on her own. She was on the same page. She continued, "There would be no reason for war anymore if this is allowed and understood by all people of the planet. Most importantly, this shouldn't and can't be stifled by the government or any corporation through collusion or vast amounts of money, temptation, or greed." She looked at us and then added, "If we fell into any of these temptations, we would then become monsters along with those people who control energy. So we would have to think in terms of conspiracy factors that are true because they deal immorally with even lesser inventions." I admired her now and see her in a different light, one that just got switched on as a great rational moral compass. I complimented her. "Good points, Amy. You managed to bring up what I never thought about. Not only was she beautiful, but her heart and mind were sharp as a whip, and as beautiful as her appearance. She absolutely wasn't a typical stereotype of a blonde." "Okay, one thing Amy Magic said. There's no such thing as inertial dampener, but a similar effect can be achieved by creating a gravitational field, opposing the acceleration of the vessel, and is by far more realistic than manipulating inertial mass. Such technology, while still non-existent at this present time, and is considered unlikely to be achieved in the foreseeable future." Then he said, "You got that from Star Trek, didn't you?" She turned and said, "Shut the hell up, magic geek." I thought to myself, I now see where she was worried, and definitely what I admired in her. She was thinking of internal inertia that could kill. Wait a minute, Carl stepped up and asked her. How do you know this is going to be that fast or good? As she was walking away to tend to her work, she turned and said with a smile, I had a dream about it. I'm not sure if it was a good dream or a bad one. Drew interrupted rather quickly, cutting off any more questions directed towards her, possibly from embarrassment of the matter of premonitions and psychic dreams, or just to protect her wise intentions, or just being protected because of the aggressive nature of the important topic. After all, it was somewhat political in its nature and against a skeptic's belief. I agree, Drew said, but we should hide it till we know what we have, and until we know no one can take it from us. Sharing it at the right time is going to be tricky. We still don't know if it'll work as well as we expect or want. Everybody agreed with that statement. This is where I realized how skeptical he was about the unexplainable and how cautious a skeptic can be, which is a good thing. Big M chimed in again. The way I see it is this. What we have from physics now represents the low-hanging fruit, and pretty much most is gone as we know it. Most of what is out there undiscovered is corrections and expansions on existing properties in nature, GUT being the big exception that I can think of. It's expensive and time-consuming to develop new ideas. Anything as groundbreaking as general relativity is unlikely to happen more than once in a few hundred years, and then trying to apply it to make new technology is harder still. Yes? Magic stated, looking for agreement. When he got it, he continued. The only new thing the 30s and the 40s is since the 30s and the 40s is string theories, M theory, and that can't be demonstrated except through math, and the only new twist is math over all seems to represent binary code, which is unusual. Yes, another form of information which is odd, Carl stated. Then Drew said, well, y'all know that I am a conspiracy fanatic and I hate the powers that be. One thing is for certain, there's a possibility if everything was real that we read about or know about, governmental and corporate conspiracies, is that the greed involved will always find a way to repress the discovery and hide it from the public if it didn't serve their means, and by that I mean their money flow, and economic disturbances caused by such a discovery is their excuse, he added. There is a danger. Carl spoke. We will have to find a way to demonstrate this technology so they simply can't deny it, and I doubt that we will be in danger going out when we are ready for re-entry, as Amy stated, into the global airspace where the danger lies. We get to that point, and that's where it might get really dangerous. We will have to brainstorm that challenge till we're sure we are safe to do so. Magic intervened and said, shut up now and listen, mates. Let him finish the part of the story now, because there's something else happening in the world just as elusive as physics and as dangerous as greed. He pointed his finger at me and said, continue. Magic and I already discussed these things for years, and I started again. When I left for Indiana, I was late from California. I waited too long, and the plan now was to go to Florida from Stockton. My whole route had been changed. So how did the guy in the craft know this? If I was crazy, we wouldn't be here doing this, so who the hell is he really? Big M said, well, the only way is that he had to be there to see it happen, which means that he has control of time somehow. Correct, and that still leaves the question, who is he? He seems so familiar somehow. It's the strangest thing. So how do you know this? Asked John, who now, hours later, returned. Remember the rhyme? I asked him. How do I know you are telling me the truth? Yes, he replied. His response was, you will know in New Mexico. That's what I got, remember? I continued. I let my girlfriend drive when I was almost out of Arizona, and that was before I got to New Mexico. I changed my route. I didn't know I was going to do that. It was a last-minute decision. Change of my plans. I didn't plan. I drove us near the border of New Mexico, at which point I was exhausted, and I let Peggy, who was with me at that time, drive. Then I slept for a while. I woke up for a few minutes in New Mexico, take over and drive, and all that I saw in New Mexico was a sign. Highway 666. I looked back as we got out to switch seats because I felt that feeling that someone was watching me. There was something off in the distance behind us in the sky that looked eerily like a gray, round-shaped craft. It was glowing slightly, and I only seen it for a few brief moments, but then it did a familiar movement. It approached, then it receded backwards, just as I seen the same maneuver done a while in the military. It then disappeared into the cloud cover, at which point I continued to drive. This time it seemed to want me to see it, and when it knew I seen it, it then left. It was calling in my mind to look at it till I knew I seen it. The odd thing was that it let me know in New Mexico of a truth, but what was it? I still couldn't figure that one out for sure. But later you would, said the voice in my head. As I review these things from my past, I just didn't know at the time. I just kept watching as my reflections started again. It took 5 more years of studying and experimenting since then, figuring out the double-blind test flaw. So here we are today. So what else have you figured out? John asked. I made some good observations. It was kind of like watching birds fly and then learning about their wings. The question was, how do we make the same technology that demonstrated in a way that works but on a much larger scale so we can work with it? This was what drove me to find out the answers to the question, can it be a workforce? It's like what science tells us about wings. It wasn't about the flapping wings that a human can wear or a machine can reproduce. It was the shape that caused the lift, and then the thrust that mattered. It was simple. It was the shape that caused the lift. It was its simplicity that allowed us to learn to fly. But everybody that tried it in the beginning missed that. So we have to look at this type of technology in the same way to truly understand it, because there surely are many blind alleys. Next, Chapter 9.